Melanie Phillips is a British journalist, broadcaster, and author. Her weekly column currently appears in the Times of London. She's a regular panelist on BBC Radio's The Moral Maze and speaks on public platforms throughout the English-speaking world. Her best-selling book, Londonistan, about the British establishment's capitulation to Islamist aggression, was published in 2006. She followed this in 2010 with The World Turned Upside Down, a global battle over God, truth, and power, which has a foreword by the great American playwright David Mamet. She's also written Guardian Angel, a personal and political memoir, and a novel, Legacy. She has a new book, The Builder's Stone, How Jews and Christians Built the West, and Why Only They Can Save It. It's been praised by, among others, Lord Andrew Roberts, whom we at FDD greatly admire, and who has been many times on FDD's podcasts. I'm excited that she's with us today here in FDD's studio to discuss many things. I'm Cliff May, and I'm excited that you're with us too, here on Foreign Policy. Well, welcome to Washington. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Cliff. Very good of you to have me here.
My pleasure. Before we start, just tell us a little bit about yourself. You were born and raised in the UK, I assume, and tell us anything you want to tell us about that, and also why you decided to go into journalism, of all things.
Well, I decided to go into journalism because when I was at university, I read English literature, which fits you for everything and nothing. And I kind of fell into it. I found myself on what was then a prestigious journalist training scheme. So I thought it was offered to me, I should take it. And so I've been a journalist ever since. As for my background, I was born and bred in London. To a Jewish family, which was very much in the tradition of the times. This was in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up. It was a Jewish family that was, proudly Jewish, but nevertheless not very religious. Went to synagogue 3 times a year. And I had a strong sense of Jewish identity, but no real Jewish education that I would say was a real education. And I didn't go to Israel until the year 2000, which people find amazing since I am known in Britain as being the most out there advocate of Israel. And people can't believe that I didn't go until the year 2000. That's a whole other story, which we could go into if you wanted to. And now I spend, having not been to Israel until the year 2000, and never had wanted to go there, in about 2001, 2002, I decided it was no longer possible for me to live in Britain as a Jew. Because I was no longer prepared to do something which I hadn't realized I was doing, which was basically being part of a community that was on its knees, asking for approval.
The Jewish community of Britain on its knees asking for approval.
Yes, because it became clear to me in 2000, 2001, 2002, that the British Jews were there on condition that they did not identify as a nation and did not identify with Israel. And that was then. And it's got very much worse since then. So from having never been to Israel until the year 2000, in 2005, after my mother died in London, she had been very ill for many years. She died in 2004. And in 2005, we bought a place in Jerusalem, where we have lived increasingly over the years. And now I spend most of my time, my husband and I spend most of our time in Jerusalem. Well, we go to London very, very frequently, every few weeks, because we are still people. My husband is also a journalist. He's a legal journalist.
Yes, very famous one.
And we both write about England or Britain, as well as the West. I write about the West in general. And so it's very important to continue to maintain a close connection to Britain. And it's very much in my thoughts, and I'm very concerned about it. I remain concerned about it. But I so much prefer being in Israel. In Israel, strange as it may seem, since Israel has been for the last 18 months and locked into a terrible war, there is unparalleled anguish, trauma, which I think will not go away from generation to generation. It's a permanent and lasting trauma. There's hardly a household which is not personally involved in some way in this terrible thing. People are anxious, they are nervous, they are grieving, and yet, this is a country where their sense of optimism and happiness and positivity is off the scale. And it's changed the way I look at everything because you go to Israel and I feel better just by being there. How crazy is that?
It is crazy. One thing I just want to pick up on what you just said. I believe, and maybe some people will quarrel with me, that it's absolutely possible for me to be, as I am, an intensely patriotic American and a Jew, just like you can be an intensely patriotic American and love that your roots are in Italy or Ukraine or Scotland or Ireland or Japan or anyway.
Sure.
Is that not quite as possible in England to say what I've just said or to believe what I've just said?
It is not possible.
It is not possible.
It's quite different in America. I think American Jews have their own problems and have had their own problems, which I think they have minimized over the years, but it's a completely different matter. Don't forget, the Jews in Britain have a terrible history. The Jews were persecuted in the Middle Ages, burned alive, and eventually thrown out, and were not allowed back at all until Oliver Cromwell turned up, being the kind of Puritan evangelical Christian who founded America, and he brought the Jews back. But they came back, although they came back then and have been in Britain ever since. There's very much a sense of being there on sufferance, a feeling that the culture is fundamentally anti-Jew, and consequently the British Jews feel the need to keep their head down below the parapet in a way that American Jews have not felt the same kind of thing at all. And there is a kind of cultural default in Britain, which is, I think, not the same in America. In America, there is, for example, one of the things that distinguishes America from Britain is this great block of churches which are scripturally faithful. They are effectively the descendants of the Puritan evangelicals who came from Britain, who were persecuted in Britain and went to America and founded America.
And were inspired by Jews, by the way, the Puritans.
Exactly. This is very much in your the book that we're going to discuss. And consequently, there isn't what there is in Britain, which is, although the Hebrew Bible was actually a foundational creed for the founders of what we now know as parliamentary democracy, constitutional democracy in Britain. Nobody knows that. Simply nobody knows that. And consequently, what is known is the culture which comes at you. If you're educated, you can't avoid it, from, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Dickens, T.S. Eliot, the greats of English literature. The more educated you are, the more you're exposed to this. And anti-Semitism courses through it. It's fundamentally Christian, the wrong kind of Christianity from this point of view. And that's the culture that British Jews are accustomed to being in. It's the culture that they imbibe if they're educated in Britain, which of course they are. They themselves imbibe it. And the disdain, polite disdain for Jews has never been far from the surface. But while I was growing up, it was very much kept to the fringes. Open avowals of anti-Jewish feeling were very much on the fringes of society. It was very much frowned on. And in more recent years, under the guise of being anti-Israel, this has become licensed to become mainstream, and that's the great difference. And I think that what's going on now in Britain, in terms of the lunacy of the attitude towards Israel, and the consequent antagonism, hostility towards Jews in general, I think in America you have it here, but you have it kind of more contained, it seems to me, on campus. It's very bad on campus. And there are attacks on Jews, particularly ultra-Orthodox Jews who are conspicuous. And those attacks are increasing in the context of the war in Gaza, in the context of radicalized Islamists and Muslims in America. But I don't think in America you have what we have in Britain, which is that it's now a default position among the educated classes that Israel is a rogue state that kills children willfully. And everybody believes this because, you know, the mainstream media is not like here, where you have Fox News, you have alternative media narratives going on. So you have a problem with your liberal media, which is, it's pretty overwhelming, but nevertheless, there are alternatives. In Britain, there's no alternative at all. So people tune into the BBC,
No,
to
I mean
Sky.
the Daily Mail or
Well, I'm
conservative.
talking about broadcasts.
Okay,
because
broadcast.
what's done the
It's
real
right. Sky
damage
News,
is the
IT, and
pictures.
BBC.
The pictures that
Yeah,
people see
yeah,
of
yeah.
so-called starving children.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
of them may be starving. Some of them may not be starving. They may be, we should all know that, so-called starving children who have been paraded in front of us have actually got some terrible disease, which has nothing to do with the war. But anyway, people see these pictures and they are told a narrative, which is basically the Hamas narrative. And because there are no platforms in Britain which tell the opposite story, which tell the truth, people of goodwill have no way of knowing that they have been literally indoctrinated with staggering lies to the most extraordinary extent, so that people do believe that lies are truth and truth is lies. And I don't think you have that here, that, people are finding, in just social situations at the office. And I was in London last week, and I was talking to some young Jewish people, and they said, "How can we deal with this? I'm up against a client who I want to buy my services. I go to the dry cleaner who I want to clean my clothes, and they come at me with these lies. What am I supposed to do? If I say you're spouting lies and it's not true, I will lose my client, and I may lose my job, or I will lose my dry cleaner." It's that. I don't think you have that here. It's like omnipresent. So in Britain, Jews are too frightened to say anything at all to anybody about anything remotely resembling a concern about the Middle East. And even silence isn't enough, because they come at you. They say, "Surely you think this," or they goad you. And I don't think Americans have that here as a matter of routine. But I may be wrong, but I think it's a different matter.
I think you're right. I mean, yes. And the BBC, it always inclined, but it's so disappointing. I mean, I traveled a lot of the world as a foreign correspondent, and always had a little radio with me, a little shortwave radio, so I could listen to the BBC at night. I mean, that's how you got your news in Africa or Russia or wherever it was. And,
well, this is the point about the BBC.
Yeah.
It makes it much more lethal than any other broadcasting institution, because the BBC is a global kite mark of objectivity, of fairness, of balance, of truth. And it was once. That's exactly what it was. And people across the world tuned in to find out what was going on, because they couldn't trust their own local media. And it has been completely captured. It's not just about Israel. It's a way of looking at the world through a very liberal left-wing perspective, which the BBC thinks is the center ground.
Yeah.
So because it thinks it's the center ground, if you come along like I do and say, actually, you're telling lies, then because they think they are the center ground, I must be the extremist and therefore can be ignored.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with the BBC with a totally closed thought system. It's terrifying.
I'll just mention this. I had never been to Israel until after I founded this organization.
Really?
Never been. And this organization was founded, after the attacks of 9/11, and in 2002, there seemed a good reason, and I went over, but no, I had never been. All right, let's talk about your book, The Builder's Stone. Maybe start with what is a builder's stone, and why is it the title of your book?
Okay, so the builder's stone is a phrase taken from a line from the Psalm 118, which is the stone that the builders disregarded is the foundation stone. And what I've used it as, what it's about is to say, what the book is about is saying that the Jewish people and the Hebrew Bible um, are despised, ignored, disdained, but actually are the foundation stone of Western civilization and of civilization itself, civilized values. And people in the West don't understand that. And the reason I wrote the book, in fact, its origins were a few years ago. I've written for decades, in fact, charting what I consider to be the onslaught upon the West by the West's own elites, the intelligentsia, on the basis that after World War II, Nazism, the Holocaust, these Western elites decided that the Western nation state was the cause of the problem. It was the cause of nationalism. Nationalism led to Hitler. And if you didn't want Hitler, you had to abolish the nation so you wouldn't get nationalism. I mean, how stupid is that? But anyway, that was the kind of thinking.
Yeah.
And then it sort of progressed as to what we know today, that the Western nation state is born in the original sins of colonialism and racism and imperialism and whiteness and all that sort of stuff. And consequently, its core institutions and values have to be completely undermined and obliterated to build a brave new world based on basically the sort of brotherhood of man. So you had an onslaught on these institutions over the years of the West, the traditional family, the education system, the very idea of the nation through the bleeding out of the borders, the representation of mass immigration as being good because we're all one brotherhood of man, and so on and so forth. And then you have the rise of Islamization, and so on. And I wrote about all these things, and I came to the conclusion that it was all basically one story, which was an onslaught on the West for these reasons. And I also came to the conclusion that at the root of it all was an onslaught on, as I said, the bedrock values of the West. Everyone knows that Christianity is the foundational creed of the West. So people generally don't think, well, Christianity didn't come from anywhere. It came from Judaism. And actually, these bedrock values are Jewish. They are values that were given to the world first in quite a revolutionary way by the Hebrew Bible, and then translated through Christianity into the West. And so it seemed to me that it was no coincidence, this I was speaking about some years ago, it was no coincidence that a society which had basically turned on itself in the way that the Western elites had turned therefore upon its core values, which were Jewish values. So it was no coincidence that it was turning against Israel and the Jewish people. And so that's kind of where that's sort of where I got to. I started writing the book, and I decided that if it was the case, as I thought it was, that the West was kind of going off the edge of the cultural cliff, then here's the thing. The Jews do cultural survival. That is the unique selling point of the Jewish people. The Jews have been have survived every attempt to get rid of them, and the cultures that have tried to get rid of them have all basically disappeared, while the Jews have, despite terrible losses, have survived and thrived as a people and have even refounded their ancient kingdom in the state of Israel. So here's the thing, I thought to myself, the Jews can actually offer priceless advice and help to the West if the West wants to listen. If the West wants to survive, well, we do cultural survival. We can tell the West what it needs to do that it's not doing. The importance of education, the importance of celebrating your culture, the importance of memorializing the losses. Keep it alive in the hearts of people. Get the people to identify with it. That's what we can tell them. And here's the other thing. It just so happens that our values are the West's values. So what a wonderful fit this would be. So I set to write this book on those lines. And then October 7, 2023 happened. And then I saw the reaction. And I suddenly realized that what I was viewing with horror in the reaction of the West to October 7 was effectively the complete repudiation of conscience, justice, and rationality. And I realized that the conclusion I'd come to about what the West was doing to itself was that it had in itself repudiated conscience, justice, and rationality. And so what we were seeing in October 7, it wasn't surprising that the reaction was what it was, because it was what the West was doing to itself on steroids. And the reaction that I was seeing to October 7, I came to the conclusion, could not be understood. The reaction by the West to October 7 could not be understood unless it was understood that the West was doing this to itself. And so I reframed the book to present my analysis of what the West was doing to itself and how it was going off the edge of the cultural cliff and could be rescued by the Jews and their example. I framed it in the framework of October 7 and its and the reaction. And I was also determined not just to say, well, this is it, they're all going to hell in a handcart, but to say, but there is a way out of this. If the West wants to survive, does it? I still don't know. I think this is an open question.
Well, I think there are some there's some parts of the West that want to, and we'll get to that in a minute.
And even if it wants to, can it survive? Could it recover? Again, I don't pass a judgment on that. But if it did, then this is the way it should be done. This is my idea for how it could be done. And so my last chapter is a very broad 10-point plan for what I call a kind of, the Jewish people's rescue remedy. I've called for, in this last chapter, a coalition of people from every single creed, culture, and religion and type, everyone in those groups who wants the West to survive, who understands the value of Western principles, and who therefore needs to acknowledge that those principles are not universal principles. Universalism is the way the West has destroyed itself. These principles that everybody in the West holds dear are particular. They are particular to the Hebrew Bible. And those people need to get together, basically, and learn from each other. Could this be done? Yes, I think it certainly could be done, but it requires leadership at all levels, and it requires an understanding of what's happened. So is this on the horizon? Well, yes and no. There are millions of people who get it in their gut. They may not think about it in abstract terms, but they understand that the political mainstream in Europe and in America abandoned decent, ordinary people who loved their nation and its values. And that has given rise to, in Europe, what's called the populist move, the rise of populists. Also in Britain, except that Britain went against the trend in last year's election by voting in a Labour government. But nevertheless, it has a very strong rising populist party. And in America,
You're talking about Nigel Farage's party?
Nigel Farage's Reform Party. And in America, the two administrations of President Trump. Whatever one thinks of Trump, whether you love him or whether you hate him, I think it can't be denied that what's brought him to power is this tremendous reaction in America against what was perceived as both the Democratic and the Republican parties taking America off the edge of the cliff. Sorry to use the word cliff twice in this respect.
It's all right.
So there is this great army of people out there who get it, but they don't have leadership. That's what's required. So I don't think it's an impossible goal at all, but it is very difficult.
One of your chapters, let me find it. I think it's something like the Red-Green Coalition. What did you say here in the book?
Red-Green Alliance.
Oh, the Red-Green Alliance. I think that's an important part of it, and maybe you should explain, because in a way, some of this goes back to before we were using words like jihad and Islamism and all that. And I'm thinking of marches going way back on campuses. Hey, hey, hi, ho, Western Civ has got to go. In other words, these were people who didn't want Western civilization even taught because
Correct.
they already considered themselves enemies of Western civilization.
Very much so.
Very odd thing. And so it's, in a way, it started there, and then for some reason, which maybe I think you have thought about, they saw, oh, the Islamists those are our allies, aren't they? Am I correct?
Very much so. And it is an extraordinary thing, isn't it? When you see these people literally marching shoulder to shoulder, the forces of the left who believe in women's rights, gay rights, freedom, personal freedom, marching shoulder to shoulder with people who would take their head off their shoulders for those things. And it's just surreal. But it's absolutely explicable by the fact that, as you suggest, they both have the same goal, which is the overturning of Western civilization. The fact that each side, the red lefties and the green Islamists, they have a radically opposing view of what society they want to put in its place, is not the point. They are using each other instrumentally to achieve broadly the same end. And they are united by hatred of Jews. Because whatever the left say piously, we don't hate Jews, we only hate Israel. The fact is that, first of all, it's patently untrue, because what they're calling for is the eradication of Zionism, which is the Jews' right to their own homeland, and they only want the Jews to have no right to their homeland. They're the only people in the world who should have no right to their homeland in their view. But also the ideologies that motivate them all, which is, the whole sort of, as it were, rainbow coalition of identity politics, which this sort of umbrella of intersectionality in which all oppressed groups band together. Now, the crucial thing is that, of course, Jews are not an oppressed group in their view, and Israel is not oppressed. And if you're not oppressed, you can't be a victim ever of anything, because you are the oppressor. Now, why do they think that Israel is an oppressor and why the Jews are an oppressor? Well, they think Israel is an oppressor, you could say, because they have this colonialist outlook or anti-colonialist outlook, and they regard Israel as a colonial occupier because they are, let's surmise, they are ignorant of the fact that the Jews alone are the indigenous people of the land, and that Zionism is basically a decolonization exercise, or was, to rid the land of the colonialist oppressors who are the Arabs, and who wish to colonize Israel once again. And just so
everyone understands, what we're talking about, Judea, Samaria, and the regions that were once part of Israeli kingdoms, Jewish kingdoms, settler colonialists from Rome took it over later, and then one foreign empire after another. The Arabs in the 7th century came and took it over. The Ottomans out of Turkey took it over. Of course, even what is now Turkey was colonized by Central Asian tribes. They called it Turkey, but it wasn't. And of course, it was the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople was the capital. Now it's Istanbul. That's settler colonialism.
Absolutely.
What Israel is decolonization.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
So they got that completely wrong. But nevertheless, in their minds, they are fighting Israeli colonialism. Okay, that's one reason why it is so anti-Jew, because it is getting at the very essence of Judaism, which you can be a Jew and you need not be observant. You can be a Jew and you need not be a Zionist. You can be a Jew and not want to live in Israel, not live in Israel. But nevertheless, what Judaism is a kind of three-legged stool. It is the people who have a religious vocation in the land. That's what Judaism is. So hitting at Zionism and Israel, the existence of Israel, hits not just at Israel, it hits at Judaism itself. So that's one reason why they are basically anti-Jew. But there's another, even more fundamental, domestic reason, as it were, which is that intersectionality says Jews are not the oppressed. Forget Israel. Jews are not the oppressed. Jews are the oppressors. Why? Because Jews run everything, they think. Jews run finance. They run international finance. They run the media. They run the law. They're everywhere. They are in control of our lives and are always serving their own interests against ours. That is classical, paranoid anti-Semitism. The most oppressed people in the history of the planet, who are a minuscule number compared with everybody else in existence, who have regularly been wiped out, and who are clearly, if they're running the world, well, my goodness me, they're not making a very good fist of it at the moment, are they? I mean, the idea that the Jews run everything is barking mad, and it is the characteristic of anti-Semitism. And this is the very foundation of intersectional, progressive, politics. So they're fundamentally anti-Jew. So they are marching shoulder to shoulder with the Islamists, bound by this fundamental hostility, not just to Israel, but to the Jewish people, and bound beyond that, as we've just said, in the common endeavor to upend Western civilization.
And in terms of anti-Zionism, this is often not made clear. People, you can talk in a kind of, I don't know, clinical way of the destruction of Israel, but there's no way Israel is destroyed without mass murder, without mass exterminations of people. They're not simply going to get in boats and sail to Brooklyn or to Miami or something like that. So and I suppose there are some people so ignorant on the campuses they don't realize when they're saying we're against Zionism, what they're saying is they're for another Holocaust, another extermination. So I think the smarter ones are. They do get that. They just rather not say it that way.
I think, that's true. I'm sure, but also I think some of them at least have in their minds as a kind of ideal scenario what happened in South Africa, which was an entirely peaceful transfer of power from one group to another. What this doesn't take into account is two things. First of all, the Jews aren't going anywhere and will fight. And secondly, the people who want to replace them don't want them to live. They want them dead.
Yeah.
They set out to murder them.
No, it would be one thing if from Gaza they came across and found a music festival and said, can we sit down and enjoy this with you? Because we would really like to have one state with you. So can you, get me a Coke? Would you mind?
Exactly.
They could have done that, and that's not what they did. They made very clear, and actually, this is you're talking about this. I think this has had a profound impact on the thinking of a lot of people, not least because the people in the various kibbutzim and the people at this festival. These are all. These are not hard right wingers. They're peaceniks essentially, right? Yeah. And they didn't think it probably didn't occur to most of the people at this festival. Gosh, we're right on the border with Gaza. I hope our security is good enough. They probably thought this is not a problem.
They facilitated it because they facilitated their own murderers. This is the terrible thing. They were, we've read of some of them who were involved in all their decency and their innocence, involved in helping the Arabs of Gaza to access medical care in Israel and so on. And they had no idea that those people were mapping every single kibbutz and every single dwelling and every single house in every single dwelling. And they knew the movements of everybody, and they used it for mass slaughter.
Yeah.
And this is the most terrible thing. And this has opened the eyes of some of those people who lived in the South. And they are saying things which, if I were to say this in Britain or America, would be considered very extreme. Not one Gazan, they say. Not one Gazan is innocent. Not one. That's what they say. These Israelis who were entirely peaceniks and devoted to left-wing causes and reconciliation and living in partnership and amity with Arabs of Gaza. Not one Gazan is innocent, they say.
Yeah, and that's particularly sad. I was recently talking to Yardina Schwartz, and there'll be a podcast with her, who wrote a book, very good book, about the 1929 massacre in Hebron, which was very similar to this.
Yeah.
But in one way, it was not entirely similar. As she makes clear, there were Arabs living in Hebron who protected their Jewish neighbors.
Right.
There were those who said, no, we
Right.
get along just fine.
Right.
Don't do this.
Right.
Some who risked their lives, some who may have been lost. There
Right.
was that.
Right.
Doesn't appear to have been a single such.
Well,
now,
yeah.
anybody now, what we are hearing, and I'm pleased to hear it, is that there are increasingly people in Gaza who think Hamas cannot rule us any longer. I don't think that means they love Israel. I don't think it means they love Jews, but they may think, you know what, Hamas has brought us terrible destruction and devastation.
Yeah.
We're not going to get over this for a generation. And in exchange for what? What did they actually win? And they also know how Hamas leaders live in places like Doha, Qatar,
Sure.
with literally billions of dollars that
Sure.
they've managed to skim off from aid or from groups like from governments like that of Qatar, which has supported
Sure.
Hamas, supported the Muslim Brotherhood, and continues to do so, and so enriches them. And I just mentioned this. There was there's an ambassador here I was talking to not long ago from a major European country, and we were going over some of this stuff, and he said, well, I'm still very much for a two-state solution. And I said, what's the problem you think you solve with a two-state solution? The grievance is not that the people of Gaza don't have a state. They had a proto-state, and if they made peace with Israel, it could have been a very successful and wealthy state. The grievance is that Israel exists, and having a two-state solution doesn't solve that grievance. It actually may help.
What was the response?
Well, I'm for a two-state solution. Now, I either believe that or those were his instructions from his capital. I don't know. He had no good answer to that, I would say. All right. I want to go into some of the things in the news because I always like to hear your opinions on it. But there are other things in the book that I should have asked you about or that you do. I mean, people need to read your book to get all of it because it's about 300 pages. There's a lot of interesting, lot that's very interesting in it in terms of history, in terms of the West's pathological disorders. You've touched on that. How the West can fight back. You've touched on that. How the West unraveled. I guess we've touched on that. The West autoimmune disorder. I guess that's thing. You might want to say a few words about what you mean by an autoimmune disorder.
Well, an autoimmune disorder, as in sort of layman's language, is where the body turns on the stuff that should be helping it, and embraces the stuff that is going to kill it. And that's exactly what the West has done. It's turned on its great friend, Israel, without realizing it's its great friend. It treats it as an enemy. And it's embracing its enemies. It's embraced Iran. It embraces Qatar. It's sucked up to China. I mean, the West is constantly appeasing the people who are doing it harm on the mistaken belief that this will stave off the threat. But there's one other point which I think I would like to emphasize before we move on, which is allied to this, which is the way the West looks at everyone else, which is part of why they don't recognize the enemy as the enemy. They regard the entire world in the Western arrogance. West is very arrogant. It thinks the entire world thinks
so
like
the Iranians have told us, but okay.
What? Yes.
I don't know if you mean it quite the same way, but yes.
Well, quite. Well, let's pass on from that. But the West tells itself that everybody in the world thinks like it. Everyone in the world is governed like it is governed by reason and by calls to its own self-interest. It cannot compute what religious fanaticism is. Doesn't get its head round this at all. Because the West is so besotted with reason, although it's become irrational, I would say, as a paradox. And that the reason why it is so obsessed with rationality is because it has sort of got rid of God. It's a post-religious universe, post-moral, I would say, because morality comes from the Hebrew Bible. But in its place has come in this great revolt against the particulars of Western morality, biblical morality, the particulars of the nation and its values, has come universalism, belief in the brotherhood of man, belief that transnational institutions and laws, because they embrace the world, must trump, to use that word, trump laws passed on and laws passed by national parliaments and the values of individual nations. And because all these transnational laws and institutions are brotherhood of man, they kind of become sort of sacrosanct. That what they do and what they stand for is unchallengeable because it's all about the betterment of the world in the view of the Western liberal. So when you get the big NGOs like Amnesty, like Human Rights Watch, which are viciously anti-Israel, which peddle murderous lies and incitement, when you get institutions such as the International Criminal Court, which has got nothing to do with law and everything to do with politics and ideology, when you've got the United Nations, which supposedly is the global avatar of peace and justice, but is actually the opposite. It's hand in glove with Hamas, and it is viciously, again, anti-Israel. Now, the reason for all this is, if you have world bodies, since the world is largely composed of countries and nations and cultures which are fundamentally anti-democratic, anti-freedom, anti-human rights, anti-Jew and anti-Israel, it is not surprising that those world institutions are going to have the same characteristics. And if you have international law built into this great sort of thing that has moral legitimacy, well, right from the start, international law or international human rights law, which was developed after Nazism, after the Holocaust, by people with the best of intentions. They said,
in response to the Holocaust,
how could we stop something like that ever happening again? The problem is that we were powerless in the rest of the world to do anything about it except go to war. So consequently, we must have institutions of law which can hold them to account. Now, the point about law is that it draws its legitimacy from from having a jurisdiction founded in the consent of the people in a democracy. International law has no jurisdiction. It is not founded in the consent of the people. It is not founded in a democracy. It is a free-floating concept. And right from the start, when this was invented with the best of intentions, there was at least one jurist who understood that if you have a universal non-jurisdiction of law, it will immediately be turned against anything that is the particular, which stands against it, which is the State of Israel.
And who was that jurist?
He was a particular person called, my mind has gone completely, Jacob Robinson.
Ah, okay, very good.
Jacob Robinson.
And he saw this in a way.
He saw this. He warned this was a terrible trap because there's no. He said it's going to be taken over by politics because it does not have legal legitimacy.
Yeah.
He understood it then, and here we are.
And you remind me. I recently saw Natasha Hausdorff, the great British Jewish lawyer, on the BBC.
Yeah.
And she's been on this podcast as well, and she was explaining so clearly, so precisely what the law actually said and how it's. And the BBC commentator, very interesting. His response was, "Well, I think at the UN they disagree with you.
Yeah.
Well, I think at Amnesty International they wouldn't agree. At the ICC, I don't think I think the ICJ. I think and in other words, just calling in these authorities.
Yes, but it's not surprising.
Yeah,
because." To the Western liberal, these are, it's like a religion.
Yeah.
They are unquestionable, and you cannot challenge them. And consequently, and it's a very fair question. If you're a Western liberal and you believe all this, it's a very fair question. You get some person defending Israel and saying they're all wrong. They're all wrong. The ICC, the ICJ, the UN, the
Amnesty,
NGOs.
Human Rights Watch.
And so, not surprisingly, the Western liberal who knows nothing about anything and who just recycles in the echo chamber, who will say, are you really saying that it's you are right and they're all wrong? And I'm afraid the answer is yes, we are saying
and
that.
that takes a lot to learn and understand. And this gets back to a point in your book. In a certain way, Western liberalism, progressivism, I don't know what exactly you want to call it, is a religion.
Yes.
And in a sense, what they're saying is, well, what you're telling me, Natasha or Melanie, it's not what the Vatican says.
Exactly.
And the Pope knows.
Exactly.
And the Pope is Antonio Gutierrez, the socialist head of the UN.
Exactly.
And to refute that, you have to say, I need you in a room for 6 months so I can give you some lessons about history, theology.
Yeah.
It's very, I mean, in a way, that's what FDD is doing.
But this is what the West has done to itself.
This is what the West has done. Absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And the reason why it's done is why I've written the book.
All right, we last 10 minutes we have left. Just go a few
the rest
things.
Of the world.
The rest of the world. Very cool. Yeah, for example, start with Iran. You had a piece in the New York Post. You also with the Iran deal. The mullahs can't be trusted. Where do you think we are in terms? How concerned are you about the deal that the president is trying to make with the mullahs of Iran?
I'm extremely concerned because I think there's no question that Donald Trump has Israel's interests close to his heart. I think he is genuinely concerned to do the best for Israel. And I think he understands that Iran is the threat that it is. He has said in terms that what he's aiming for is the complete, verifiable destruction of its nuclear program.
Dismantlement is the word we're using. Yep.
Mm-hmm. However, he thinks, I think, that everything in the world that's bad is a potential deal that he could bring off to a successful conclusion. I recall when the Obama administration concluded the disastrous 2015 deal, I remember Donald Trump saying after, in the context of that, that the problem was it was a rotten deal. No, that wasn't the problem. The problem was there was a deal. Because you cannot make a deal with the devil. You cannot make a deal with people whose position is non-negotiable. You can't negotiate. If you try and negotiate with a non-negotiable position, it's not a negotiation, it's a surrender of some kind. Because you just have to defeat it. You have to get rid of it. There is no negotiation. They have either got to stop it or you have to take it out. Because the essence of the Iranian position is they are mandated by what they consider to be a kind of divine commandment to do this.
Oh, it's theological.
And they believe that by doing it, they will bring to earth, because they're run by, as you know, the Shia sect called the Twelvers. They believe that if they provoke the apocalypse, they will bring the Shia Messiah, the 12th Imam, to earth. How can you negotiate with people who believe that? There is no negotiation with that.
And we in the West have trouble believing that people believe such things because our secular religion is such. You think, people say that, but it's like,
So you have, on the one hand, Mr. Trump saying things which are completely correct about dismantling the entire thing. On the other hand, he's doing this deal. And I read, to my very great concern, that Vice President J.D. Vance is saying this is going in entirely the right direction, this deal, because we have no problem with Iran having a civil nuclear program. The only problem is they mustn't weaponize it. We've been down this road before.
Yes, although I think and I'm could be wrong, in most recent things he has said, he's been, again, politicians don't always, and you have to say, he's very smart, but you've spent a lot of time to understand exactly what this means. And he's been clearer than he had been, that he's talking about a civil nuclear program where there's no enrichment of uranium.
That's right. He's saying
no
that.
Processing.
He's saying that.
Okay, if you don't do that and you just bring in your,
but it can't happen. It can't happen because there is no way that the Iranians will ever
they will accept that,
Well, first of all, they won't accept it. But secondly, they accepted something like that with the 2015 deal, and everybody said, it's going to be fine because we can verify it. Well, excuse me? You can never verify it.
There's got to be no enrichment, no reprocessing.
You've got to prove it.
It's got to be verifiable.
You cannot prove it.
You're right. Okay.
It has to be destroyed.
Yeah.
Now, Vance doesn't seem to understand this. Witkoff certainly doesn't understand it. Witkoff seems to think that all these dreadful people, Putin, the Ayatollahs, they're really great people with whom he can do business. I mean, is he crazy or what? Trump is not surrounded by these people. He's using them. They are his avatars. So, you know, I am extremely concerned about this. And now we've seen with the Houthis, it was peace in our time, said Trump last week. There's now, I have seen them off. Well, excuse me, he didn't see them off. He was bombing the hell out of them. And meanwhile, Israel was getting missiles. And then it got this hypersonic, whatever it was, missile, which hit Ben Gurion Airport.
You think it was hypersonic?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's said to
I
be.
don't think it was.
It was a missile, which hit Ben Gurion Airport.
Yeah.
And then the Israelis, went to town.
Oh, yeah.
And they hit the oil terminal and they hit the airport. And then the Houthis said, okay, we give in. And Trump said, that's great. We're going to stop bombing you. But Israel will continue to be bombed. So what Trump has effectively said is, we're looking after American interests, brackets. I don't believe he's secured those either, because I don't believe the Houthis are going to allow free shipping through the Red Sea at all. I think this is still a delusion and snare. But if you take Trump's words on face value, what he's basically said is, I've managed to make America safe from these people. To hell with Israel. Well, excuse me, this is supposed to be the most pro-Israel president in the history of the planet? Israel is beside itself over this. Because what does it mean? We can't trust this man.
Well, I'll give you a better spin on it, which is we have Americans manning THAAD missiles to stop those, a THAAD missile defense system to stop anything that the Houthis try to hit Israel with. That's important. And it's very important if Israel is not made to fight any of its enemies with one hand tied behind its back.
Absolutely.
So, part of what attracts a lot of people everybody to Israel is the fact that Israel is willing to fight for itself and fight for the West.
Quite so.
And they need to be allowed to do so. And I think a lot of people would say, I think I would, that the Biden administration said, well, you can fight, but only so far.
For sure.
We don't want you to win because we want to have a ceasefire.
For sure.
And so there's that. So that, while I'm not thrilled with this, if he's saying the Israelis, we're going to help you protect yourself, the THAAD missiles do that, and they're there. We're going to help you with arms so you can fight, and we're not going to restrict you when you go against your enemies.
Well, first of all, that's great. But, there was that missile that hit Ben Gurion.
It did, yes,
okay.
yes.
And secondly, when it comes
we've got to learn from that how to do. I mean, listen,
well,
missile defense has been great. If you think about the 300 drones and missiles that Iran fired directly, which the U.S. and Israel and some others managed to, that was great. But there's a lot to learn in missile defense.
For sure. But when it comes to Iran, the question is, if Israel decides it has to take out the nuclear infrastructure. First of all, can Israel do that? All our understanding is that it can damage it, it can set it back, but it can't destroy it without the bombers that America has. Okay, if Israel in desperation feels that it has no alternative but to do what it can, and if Iran then unleashes in some way against Israel, will Trump's America come to Israel's aid? All that armory, all those the aircraft carriers and the weaponry that's been assembled in the region, has that been assembled by President Trump in order to give his deal-making leverage? This is the threat, but would he actually use it?
Well, and Iran's rulers don't know either, and if they think he's bluffing, then they'll stand firm. If they think he intends to use that, if they don't capitulate, if they don't make serious concessions, if they don't dismantle their nuclear program, then they might, because then it says the original first Ayatollah Khomeini said, "I must drink from the poison chalice," because their survival is what's most important. After that, it's their expansion beyond.
Yeah.
Anyhow, there's all that. I do want the IDF is saying now, before Trump comes to the Middle East, as he's planning to do, they want to see hostages released, and if not, they're going to, as hard as they've been on Hamas, it's not been hard enough, and they're going to go in a lot harder. Trump is not telling them not to. But there's quite a bit of, I mean, you don't find all Israelis agreeing to any policy, including this one. Where are we on Hamas and Gaza, in your view? And where are the Israelis in terms of the arguments they're having over this?
Have always wanted two potentially impossible things together. They want to see Hamas eradicated forever as a credible military force, and they want the hostages back.
Yeah.
And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu was greatly at fault. On October the 8th, he should have said, we'll try everything we can to get the hostages back. But ultimately, we have to defend the nation because 10 million people are more important than 250. Hard as that seems, and we will try everything we can to get them back. But there may be a point where we can't. The people were never told the truth. They were told, we're going to get the hostages back and we're going to defeat Hamas. And it's been impossible because the hostages are quite apart from what the Biden administration was doing in tying Israel's hands. Israel's hands were tied from the start by the fact they had those hostages underground or wherever they were.
Yeah, no, right.
And they were hampered. They were paralyzed, and they're now paralyzed, or they were paralyzed. Now, the fate of the hostages, the fact that so many have died, the fact that the people who've come back, some of them in the most terrible state, the trauma of the existence of even a handful of live hostages is such that it's in everyone's heads and hearts in Israel 24/7. And unfortunately, it's also been weaponized by those who want to bring Netanyahu down by hook or by crook. And so these poor hostage families have been used in order to incite hatred of Netanyahu. On the basis that, Netanyahu is deliberately spinning this out for his own purposes, as if, a moment's thought, if it is the case, as these critics say, that Netanyahu is a man without conscience, without morality, he's only out for himself and his political survival. If that is the case, then is it really credible that he would not do the one thing that the people will hold him to account for, which is bringing the hostages back, if he possibly could? It doesn't make sense by any standards. But anyway, there is a tremendous and tremendously understandable head of steam, anguish, I should say, not head of steam, and fury and frustration over the hostages. And that is a political force that Netanyahu has had to grapple with and that the IDF are very much aware of. Now, as you say, the IDF are now preparing to go all in. And ultimately, even if their strategy succeeds, their strategy is that they are going to control the humanitarian food supplies. They are going to be not distributing it themselves, but they're going to be controlling the distribution in order to prevent the Hamas from stealing it. And they will do so in the south of Gaza. So they will direct the civilian population, who they will screen to the south, and thus leave Hamas exposed and without food and supplies wherever they are, and then they will kill them. Now, Hamas has got the hostages with them. So what are they going to do? The hostages were taken for one reason only, to ensure that Israel will never win. And if it came to the point where Hamas is saying Israel's going to win, they're going to kill them. Why should they not? They're not going to say Israel's going to win, so we give up. We're going to give the hostages back. No, they're going to kill them because that's what their lives are forfeit. And this is a terrible thing. And this requires a degree of self-discipline and emotional restraint in any population that is very hard to achieve and impossible to achieve without proper leadership. Netanyahu is not giving that leadership. All we hear is boasting, vainglorious boasting, and sort of chest thumping and declarations of martial intent. He should have taken the people with him. And he hasn't. He emulates Churchill. Churchill is his role model. Churchill won the war Second World War, because he took the people with him.
Mm-hmm.
They thought he was leading them,
Mm.
and they were behind him. And I don't, for a moment, try to minimize the malicious opposition to Netanyahu. I don't for a moment try to minimize that, but my goodness, he has not made it easy for himself.
All right. I have 5 other things, but I'm not going to go through. I'm going to ask you one more question, as tight as you can, because I've kept you too long. But I do want to hear you talk 1 minute about Qatar.
Oh, Qatar. Qatar is a mystery to me.
It is.
Why on earth is America and Israel so besotted with Qatar? Recently, Netanyahu spoke against Qatar. It's the first time I ever heard him say this. Qatar has been used as the honest broker throughout these last 18 months in the negotiations for the hostages. The honest broker, the genuine, legitimate interlocutor. Qatar is Hamas. It founded Hamas, it funds Hamas, it protects Hamas, it is Hamas. What on earth do they think they're doing? President Trump says Qatar are very fine people. Witkoff says they are fantastic people.
Biden said major non-NATO ally. That's how Biden designated Qatar as a major non-NATO ally. They have the very small population. I mean, there's like 2 million people there, but as citizens, it's like 350,000. They have unbelievable amounts of money to spend influencing people around the world. And they have done so
They've bought up a
brilliantly.
great deal of London, and they brought up a great deal of American universities and other infrastructure.
Exactly.
A bit like China.
Exactly.
They have, for decades, been very smart, positioned themselves so that it's almost impossible to disavow them. But, how long is the West going to be in this trance in which they have autoimmune disease, embraced their mortal enemy?
Right. The Muslim Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood regime. But they wear ties and jackets when they have to, so they must be just like us. It's a small world after all. That's what Disney told us.
Well, it's an amazing thing, isn't it? The civilization, which is the apex of reason, could not be more stupid.
I'll leave it on that last comment. Thank you, Melanie. It's always interesting, provocative, and fascinating to talk to you. Thanks for being with us here today.
A great pleasure. Thank you very much, Cliff, for giving me the time.
And thanks to all of you who've been with us for this conversation here today on Foreign Policy.